7 years ago, I was expelled from college just 3 months after starting. The reason? A false and malicious rumor spread by my parents and sister. Their motive? Pure jealousy. My sister had been rejected from her dream college, which happened to be the same one I had been accepted into. Despite her mediocre grades, my parents had pinned all their hopes on her. When her rejection letter arrived, they were devastated. But instead of supporting me in my achievement, they turned their disappointment into resentment. My sister had always been the golden child in our family. I had learned long ago that her happiness was my parents' top priority, so I wasn't surprised when they refused to cover my tuition. They told me to figure it out on my own, clearly hoping that I wouldn't be able to attend. But I wasn't willing to give up so easily. I reached out to my grandparents, who agreed to co-sign a student loan for me, and against all odds I made it. By that time, I had already moved out of my parents' house. The environment at home had become so toxic that I could tell I wasn't welcome there anymore. It wasn't the first time I felt unwanted, but the hostility had reached a breaking point. Leaving was my only option. Unfortunately, my sister found out that I'd managed to attend the college anyway, and she couldn't stand it. She complained to my parents, and together, they concocted a plan to destroy everything I'd worked for. With the help of some of her friends, they began spreading rumors that I was dealing drugs on campus. At first, I thought it was just petty drama, but things quickly escalated. The rumors gained traction, and the college authorities launched an investigation. It wasn't long before the police were involved, and to my horror, they found a stash of marijuana in my dorm room. To this day, I'm convinced my parents paid someone to plant it there. With so many people coming in and out of the room, sneaking something in wouldn't have been difficult. Some students even came forward claiming I had offered them drugs. Whether they were bribed or just enjoyed the attention, I'll never know. The evidence against me seemed overwhelming. Even though my roommate stood by me and I pleaded my innocence, the authorities were convinced I was guilty. The process was swift, and before I could fully comprehend what was happening, I was expelled. It felt like my life had been ripped out from under me. And if that wasn't enough, the fallout didn't stop there. My parents, who orchestrated this nightmare, told my grandparents about the situation, painting me as some kind of criminal. My grandparents, who had helped me get the loan, believed the accusations. They didn't think I was capable of such behavior, but as they put it, there's no smoke without fire. With the stash found in my room and the statements against me, even they couldn't believe my side of the story. I don't blame them. I know how damning the evidence looked. I had no money left. Every cent I'd saved from part-time jobs in high school had gone toward getting into college. The student loan was useless since I'd been expelled, but I still had to repay what had already been spent. With no family support and nowhere to go, I hit rock bottom. I knew I couldn't default on the student loan. Otherwise, my grandparents, who had co-signed it, would be on the hook. Homeless and jobless, I had just a few months of grace period before repayments were due for the tuition already spent. The only silver lining was that marijuana had been decriminalized in my state, so I avoided serious legal trouble. But back then, that small mercy didn't feel like much of a blessing. It only made me realize how truly alone I was. With nowhere else to turn, my college roommate and her parents offered to take me in for a couple of weeks. Their kindness was a lifesaver, but I didn't want to overstay my welcome or become a burden. So I took the first job I could find, working as a cashier at a grocery store. I lived as frugally as possible, saving every penny, and within a month, I thanked them for their generosity and moved into the cheapest apartment I could find. It was in a terrible neighborhood, cramped and dingy, with 3 other roommates squeezed into a small space. But it was mine and I made the best of it. From there, I took on as much work as I could find. My days and weekends were consumed by a relentless grind. I refused to allow myself to rest, knowing I had no safety net and no one else to rely on. Looking back, I honestly don't know how I survived those years. It's all a blur of work and exhaustion. Happiness was rare, but I found some in the small victories, like receiving a paycheck. Over the years, I worked every job you can imagine: receptionist, waitress, bartender, saleswoman, and more. None of it was easy, but I pushed through. Eventually, I moved into a slightly better apartment. It was still small, but at least I didn't have to share it. And then last year, something I never thought possible happened. I bought my own house. 4 years ago, I struck gold when I was working as a receptionist at a real estate firm. While answering phones and scheduling appointments, I kept thinking I can do this too. When a sales position opened up, I applied, and to my surprise, I got the job. That opportunity was my turning point. I didn't have a college degree like many of my colleagues, but I had experience with people, a strong work ethic, and apparently enough charm to make an impression. I worked harder than I ever had before, steadily climbing the corporate ladder. 2 years ago, I landed a senior position, and last year I was promoted to upper management. For the first time, I felt truly proud of myself, not just for what I had accomplished but for proving to myself that I could rebuild from nothing. With my promotion finalized, I decided it was time to buy a home of my own. After years of helping others find their dream homes, it was my turn. I don't mean to brag, but I went from rags to riches. I now make 6 figures annually, and am one of the top-performing employees at my company. Sometimes I think about finishing my college degree, but beyond that, I'm incredibly happy with how my life has turned out. I've had no contact with my family for the past 7 years, and they haven't reached out to me either. I'm fine with that. I don't miss them, and I genuinely believe my life is better without them. The only connections I've kept from my old life are a few high school friends and of course my college roommate. Even though we only lived together for 3 months, she became a true friend, and we've stayed in touch ever since. But as for my parents and sister, I've never missed them. They tried to destroy my life, and while they didn't succeed, they showed me exactly who they were. I made it clear to everyone in my life that I didn't want updates about them, and I've lived in peace ever since. I've made it clear over the years that I didn't want to hear anything about my family, good or bad. Most people respected that boundary, which is why I was completely blindsided when my parents showed up at my door with news about my sister's death. They said she had passed away in a car accident last month. I hadn't been in touch with them for 7 years, so their sudden appearance was shocking enough. What really threw me off was how they found out where I lived. They later admitted they had begged my old college roommate and her parents for my address, using the fact that they had already lost one daughter and didn't want to lose the other. Eventually, they wore my roommate's parents down, and that's how they ended up on my doorstep. When they arrived, the first thing they did was hug me and tell me how proud they were of me. It felt strange and unnatural. These were people who had never once praised me growing up. Even as a child, my accomplishments were ignored to avoid making my sister jealous. But now here they were, full of compliments and teary-eyed. At the time, I was too stunned by the news of my sister's passing to process anything else. I tried to be kind, despite everything they had done to me in the past. We made small talk for a while. They shared details about the accident and broke down crying, and I found myself consoling them. It's hard to explain why I acted this way, especially after everything they put me through. Maybe it's just because I'm human. Grieving parents or not, I couldn't bring myself to slam the door in their faces. My friends have since called me a doormat for not shutting them out immediately, and maybe they're right. But in that moment, I was overwhelmed by a storm of mixed feelings: confusion, shock, even a small flicker of compassion. It had been 7 years since I'd seen my parents, and I didn't know how to react. Then they got to the real reason for their visit. After their initial grief, they said they were there to apologize for what had happened during my college years. They admitted they had been wrong, and told me they shouldn't have done what they did. They explained that they had been too blinded by my sister's disappointment to see the truth. Apparently, when my sister accused me of being involved with drugs and claimed I had cheated my way into college, they believed her without question. According to them, she had been feeding them lies about me ever since I left home. At first, they were skeptical, but her conviction eventually convinced them. They claimed they thought I had stolen her rightful spot in college by plagiarizing essays, which led to her rejection. This, of course, was completely fabricated by her. They insisted they only recently realized the truth after speaking with my old roommate. They told me they wanted to repair our relationship. But as soon as those words left their mouths, something inside me snapped. All the pain, betrayal, and anger I had buried for years came rushing to the surface. I screamed at them, telling them they had no right to come here and pretend they didn't know what they had done to me. I accused them of throwing my sister under the bus because she wasn't here to defend herself. I told them I believed they had known all along that I was innocent and had actively helped my sister sabotage my life. I said their sudden apology was nothing more than a desperate attempt to latch onto me now that they had no other children to rely on for support in their old age. They looked genuinely shocked by my outburst. They insisted that they were telling the truth, that they had been completely unaware of my sister's lies, and that they had nothing to do with planting anything in my dorm room. But I wasn't having it. I yelled at them to leave and kept yelling until they finally walked out the door. Once they were gone, I called my old roommate. As much as I loved and valued her, I was upset that she had given my parents my contact information without telling me. When I confronted her, she admitted to it but said she had felt cornered. She told me they seemed desperate and had played the grieving parent card so heavily that she couldn't find it in her heart to refuse. I could understand why my roommate had made the choice she did, but that didn't mean I was happy about it. Regardless, I explained everything that had happened when my parents visited and shared the details of our heated fight. After I finished, she told me something surprising that made me reconsider the way I'd reacted to them. Apparently, when my parents first contacted her and accused me of ruining my own life with my so-called actions in college, she had stood her ground and told them they were wrong. She recounted the entire story for them, the rumors that suddenly started spreading, the accusations made by certain people, and of course the mysterious stash that appeared in my dorm room. Initially, my parents refused to believe her. They insisted that, while they were willing to try to fix their relationship with me, they wouldn't let her paint me as some kind of saint. But as she continued explaining the details and inconsistencies, they seemed to realize she was telling the truth. My roommate said she was shocked by their reaction. She had always assumed they were involved in orchestrating the entire scheme. However, based on their surprise and confusion, she started to believe that my sister might have been the sole mastermind. It appeared that my sister had lied to everyone so convincingly that my parents had genuinely believed her, even to the point of supporting her actions. When my parents finally understood what had happened, they looked genuinely devastated. That's when my roommate decided to share my contact information with them. She admitted to me that she had debated it for a while but ultimately chose to do so without consulting me because she believed I would refuse if asked. She apologized for not telling me beforehand but said she thought it was the right thing to do. And she was probably right. I wouldn't have agreed to meet them if I'd known in advance. But what's done is done. They came over, we argued, and now I'm left questioning everything. Maybe my parents truly didn't have anything to do with what happened in college, apart from the mistake of blindly believing my sister. Perhaps my sister orchestrated the entire situation, and my parents were just pawns in her plan. If that's true, then maybe their apology was genuine, and I overreacted by yelling at them. I've been reflecting on this ever since. On one hand, I feel terrible about how I treated them when they visited. But on the other hand, I keep telling myself that my reaction was long overdue. After everything they put me through, maybe I don't owe them anything, not an apology, not a second chance, nothing. For now, I'm torn about whether I should reach out to them and try to mend things or simply let it all go and move on with my life. We shouldn't speak ill of the dead, but honestly, I think my sister's actions brought a lot of this upon herself. That doesn't mean she's solely to blame. My parents were just as responsible for blindly believing everything she said without bothering to verify anything. They treated her as their golden child, and I think that blinded them to reality. It's almost as if they convinced themselves that she could do no wrong. For example, when I consistently had better grades than her, why would I feel the need to plagiarize her essays? Logic should have told them that her accusations didn't make sense. But instead of questioning her, they chose to believe her lies. And I think that was their way of protecting the perfect image they had of her. They gaslight themselves into ignoring facts and made me the scapegoat for everything that went wrong. Even if they weren't directly involved in planting evidence in my dorm room or bribing people, their refusal to trust me and their willingness to vilify me was enough to cause irreparable harm. And even if I could somehow excuse what happened in college and chalk it up to my sister's manipulative nature, I can't forget how poorly they treated me throughout my life. My sister wasn't the only problem. My parents enabled her behavior. From an early age, they indulged her every whim, especially when she started struggling with her weight and social acceptance. She faced bullying at school, which I now realize must have been incredibly hard for her. But instead of addressing it constructively, my parents coddled her and let her bitterness fester. Unfortunately, she directed that bitterness toward me, as if I were the root of all her problems. I remember how we used to fight constantly, and my parents always sided with her. They never celebrated my accomplishments, and the final blow was when they refused to pay for my college tuition, just because my sister hadn't been accepted. That's what pushed me to leave home. And it's not something I can easily forgive. Even if my sister manipulated them into believing her lies, they still allowed her behavior to dictate my life and undermine my future. The struggles I went through after being kicked out weren't just the result of what happened in college. They were the culmination of years of neglect and favoritism. My parents are the reason I had to claw my way up from nothing, working tirelessly to build a life for myself. That's not something you forget or move past easily. Now that they've lost the daughter they actually cared about, they're trying to mend fences with me, their backup option. It's harsh, but that's how it feels. They didn't come to apologize because they genuinely realized their mistakes. They came because they had no other choice. My friends are right. I've already given them more grace than they deserve by even letting them into my home. I see clearly now that their regret is rooted in loss, not love. I apologize if this has been a bit of a rant, but I needed to get all this negativity out of my system. Thanks for reading this far, and I hope that the next time I share an update, it will be something more positive. I had 7 years to think about everything they did to me, and in all that time they never once tried to contact me. It wasn't until they lost their golden child that they suddenly decided I mattered. It took them 7 years to find out the truth, and only because it was convenient for them to do so now. The fact that they thought a flimsy apology could make up for ruining my life over a web of lies is just insulting. I wasn't going to let them sweep everything under the rug with empty words. When they refused to leave after I told them to go, I called the cops right in front of them. That's when they began yelling at me about how unfair I was being. Once again, they tried to guilt me by saying they'd already lost one daughter and didn't want to lose another. Hearing that, I couldn't help but laugh. I told them flat out that they never had 2 daughters to lose, just one. I told them I was sorry for their loss, but I wasn't their daughter anymore and never really had been. They'd never treated me like I mattered, and I'd spent the past several years leaving them behind, emotionally and otherwise. They then tried twisting my words, accusing me of acting like I was too good for them now that I'd achieved financial success. That wasn't what I meant at all. I'd only meant I had moved on from them. But honestly, I was too tired to explain myself. Instead, I told them they were right, I was too good for them. If they wanted to believe my success meant I thought less of them, fine. I wasn't going to waste more energy trying to change their minds. They weren't the kind of people who'd ever see things from anyone else's perspective. At that point, they started cursing at me, but thankfully, the cops arrived and escorted them off my property. After they were gone, I finally felt some relief. That's when I decided to consult a lawyer about filing for a restraining order. I don't know if I have enough grounds to get one since they haven't directly threatened me, but I don't want to deal with them showing up unannounced again. I refuse to sell the house I worked so hard to buy and call my home. Hopefully, they'll either get the hint and leave me alone or give me a clear reason to take legal action. A couple of months have passed since then. My parents haven't reached out to me again, but my grandparents did. They apologized for not believing me when I told them I was innocent back then. I forgave them. After all, they did help me when I needed it, and with the evidence that had been planted, I can see why they might have doubted me. Even so, I've decided to keep some distance. While I don't harbor resentment toward them, I still can't forget that they didn't stand by me when it mattered most. Through my grandparents, I learned that my parents sold their house and moved to the suburbs, supposedly because they couldn't bear all the memories of my sister. I can understand their grief, but I'm mostly just relieved that they're far away from me now. As for me, I've truly moved on. My career is thriving, and my life feels full in ways I never thought possible during those dark years. I've forgiven what I can, but I'm focused on building my own life and my own family, one that's built on love, respect, and mutual support. I'm finally in a place where I can say I'm content. Thank you to everyone who read and supported me through this journey. Your encouragement has meant more than I can say. Here's to brighter days ahead.